Perhaps you are thinking about someone more than you want to. Even though you have tried to forget, and you have told yourself, I am okay. But as soon as there is a quiet moment, a piece of music, a rainfall, your mind returns to that presence. So why are there people we cannot stop thinking about? Is it because of love? Or is it something deeper that we have never named? In this video, we step into the world of ancient Zen stories, where every teaching, every image, every sound is a mirror reflecting consciousness. Do not try to let go. Simply sit down, breathe softly, and listen. Who knows, the person you cannot forget may be the doorway leading you back to yourself. In a remote mountain region where white clouds touch the roofs of ancient temples, there lived an old Zen master named Yun Men. He dwelt in tranquil nature, with spring eternally alive in his mind. One windless afternoon, as the sun began to cast slanted rays across the rocky slope, a young monk came to find him. The boy's eyes were full of anxiety, as if the thoughts in his mind had turned into a flood that could not be stopped. "Master," the young monk said in a voice as soft as falling leaves, "I cannot stop thinking about my mother, about my distant brother, about things that have not happened but feel as though they already are in my heart." The Zen master did not answer immediately. He simply raised his head and looked at the vast emptiness above, where the sky stretched without boundary, then gently spoke one word, "Clouds." The young monk followed his gaze and saw white strands of cloud drifting lazily across the silk-smooth blue sky. Moving so lightly they left no trace behind. Yun Men spoke slowly, his voice blending with the wind. "Do you see? Clouds do not need to know where to go. They do not hurry. They do not fear. They do not fix their shape. The sky does not force the clouds to stop, nor chase them away. It simply remains present, embracing each passing one." That comparison began to seep into the young monk's heart like dew soaking into parched earth. The master continued, explaining that our thoughts are like clouds, they arrive and depart, change shape. No one can hold them or make them disappear completely. If we chase after each cloud, the mind grows tired. But if we learn to be like the sky, expansive, patient, unentangled by each drifting cloud, we will find peace. That deep realization does not come from forcing silence or trying to stop the flow of thought, but from understanding that we are not those floating thoughts. We are the vast space that contains them. Sitting beside his master, the young monk closed his eyes gently and felt his breath move in and out like wind over a still lake. Images of his mother, his brother, conversations that had never taken place became lighter. Not because they vanished, but because he no longer tried to control or possess them. Emotions were allowed to be present like clouds drifting across the sky, neither clung to nor chased away. In that moment, he was no longer the one struggling with thoughts, but the observer, part of the vast silence. The master smiled, saying nothing more, because he knew the deepest lesson was not in words, but in the silence the heart could hear. A silence as vast as the sky, where every thought is allowed to pass, leaving no trace, requiring no explanation, needing to be nothing at all. A gentle afternoon breeze glided through the canopy, carrying the scent of wild flowers from the mountain slopes into the silent temple courtyard where the two remained seated without needing to speak. From that space, an unnamed understanding began to bloom in the young monk's mind, no longer an urgent demand to stop thinking, no longer struggling to reach a state of emptiness as once imagined. Only a sense of vast openness like the sky emerging from behind thick clouds. Zen Master Yun Men, by choosing not to explain further, showed him something miraculous. That peace does not come from avoidance but from the ability to face everything as it is. Memories of the mother with her gentle eyes, the distant laughter of the brother from childhood, all appeared clearly like reflections in crystal clear water, but they no longer weighed heavily. No longer gripped the young restless mind yearning for calmness. The surrounding world became transparent as if the very universe was quieting to witness the subtle transformation within a human being. The young monk's mind no longer got swept away by emotion but became a still lake, deep enough to hold everything. Calm enough not to react to every ripple. Questions that once persisted like, why am I like this? When will I finally feel stable? Is it wrong to still care about the past? Gradually dissolved into the space like dewdrops melting into the morning breeze, no longer needing answers. No longer stirring conflict. The mind, once no longer identified with the passing thoughts, naturally returned to its original state, where everything may pass without leaving a mark. The Zen master looked at the young monk with a gaze free of judgment, free of expectation, as if he were merely part of the natural scene, like a tree that has stood for 1,000 years. Witnessing countless clouds pass without ever trying to hold one, there was no urgency to awaken, no expectation to understand immediately. Only pure presence, the only thing enough to cause the seed of awakening in the young monk's heart to sprout. Against the deep blue sky, clouds continued drifting with no purpose, yet suddenly carried profound meaning, because someone had learned to see them with new eyes. Eyes no longer obscured by the desire to change or the fear of what is coming. In the seemingly ordinary moment, an unprecedented peace quietly entered the deepest core of the soul, not like a breeze passing through, but like a slow burning flame that will continue to glow, even if no one sees it with the eyes. Dusk settled. Mountain shadows lengthened across smooth gravel. Forest bird calls faded into silence as if all beings were sinking with the two into a form of deep Zen that required no words. In that newly opened consciousness, the young monk suddenly realized that he did not need to do anything to achieve peace, no need to resist emotion, no need to block thought, no need to strive to never think again. He only needed to accept that the mind has the right to think. Feelings have the right to appear. Memories have the right to visit like temporary guests who will eventually depart. Previously, whenever old images returned, he would worry and blame himself, believing he had not practiced enough, not purified enough. But in the silence spreading from the teaching about clouds and sky, he began to understand. Awakening does not lie in eliminating what should not be, but in recognizing what is happening without reacting, without labeling, without concluding. It was as if the armor around his soul had finally begun to loosen, all those invisible layers of reason constantly trying to control the heart, trying to force themselves into fitting some ideal version of spiritual discipline. He once believed that meditation meant having no thoughts at all, that to truly follow the path meant being as thoughtless as a rock, as still as a tree. But today, through his master's gaze and under a sky turning purple, he realized, meditation is the acceptance of all things. Just like the sky embraces every kind of cloud, whether white or dark, whether floating lazily or rushing by. No cloud is ever wrong. It is only the mind that sees them which makes them feel heavy or light. The longing he felt for his mother no longer weighed him down. Instead, it became a tender part of his inner world, when seen with compassion. It was as gentle as a falling petal. The worry he carried for his brother far away no longer pierced his chest, but instead served as a soft reminder that his heart was still open, still capable of loving sincerely. The air around the temple carried a faint scent of incense from the distant shrine, like a silent bell quietly reminding him of the sacredness of every present moment. Right now, he no longer felt the need to escape his thoughts, because they no longer had power over him. Freedom did not come from removing thoughts, but from realizing that he was bigger than all of them, just as the sky remains unchanged, no matter how wildly the clouds swirl. In that realization, stillness no longer had to be something he chased. It was already there, always waiting to be seen. The sun had slipped behind the mountain, leaving behind one last trace of pink light on the edge of the sky, like a quiet period ending a long chapter of endless thinking. In the silence that wrapped the forested hills, the young monk bowed his head to his master. No thanks were needed, no explanation necessary, because the most important thing had happened. He had learned how to sit with himself, without feeling alone. On a crisp morning, when sunlight still hid shyly behind misty mountain peaks, the old Zen master sat quietly beside a stream, eyes half closed as if listening not just to the sound of water flowing, but to the silent stirrings of the human soul. A young monk approached, his face revealing the weight of a storm he had not yet learned to calm. Before he could say a word, the master gestured for him to sit. No questions, no urgency, just a quiet presence between two souls walking the delicate line between thought and feeling. Finally, the boy spoke, his voice as soft as wind brushing through bamboo. This morning, a friend did not greet me like usual, and all day my heart has felt heavy. My mind created 100 reasons. I thought maybe he was upset, or sad, or disappointed in something I unknowingly did. I kept imagining things, over and over, unable to stop. The Zen master opened his eyes, deep and still like the bottom of a lake, and looked at the boy without blame or explanation. He picked up a fallen yellow leaf and gently dropped it into the stream, letting the current carry it away without farewell. The stream kept flowing, never pausing to question where the leaf was going, never needing to know which branch it had fallen from, whether by the wind or the season. That moment was a wordless answer. The master turned to him, and his voice, light as mist but deep as stone, said, "When a leaf falls, do you think it does so out of anger toward the wind, or because the tree no longer loves it?" The question left the young monk still. A sad smile began to form on a face not yet used to such peace. He began to understand that the human mind has a strange habit, always trying to fill empty space with stories, always fearing silence so much that it creates noise just to avoid feeling abandoned. A distant glance, a moment of silence, a message unanswered, all become fertile ground for imagined stories to grow like weeds. When someone does not behave the way we expect, the mind pulls out old scripts, labels the moment, assigns meaning, puts on the glasses of the past, and forgets that reality is always new, always unpredictable. That friend may be worrying about his family, may have slept poorly, or may simply be retreating into his own inner world, a world the boy has no way of entering. But instead of letting things be, the mind begins its narrative. He does not care about me anymore. Maybe I did something wrong. Perhaps everything has changed. These stories repeat like an old radio station, not only tiring, but pulling the listener away from what is actually real. The Zen master slowly placed his hand over his heart, where it beat steadily like the wooden bell in morning temple rituals, and said, "Suffering does not come from what others do. It comes from the meaning you give it." The young monk bowed his head, eyes closing gently, as if realizing for the first time how much of his life had been lived in things that were never real, entire dramas written and directed by no one, yet powerful enough to weigh down a whole day. He felt his soul like a still pond after the wind had passed, like a field after the rain, quietly welcoming the first light of day without needing to ask why it arrived late. In that moment, he learned an essential truth: not every silence is a sign of distance. Not every pause means rejection. Some silences are simply space, space for everything to breathe, to live, to be in its own way. A dragonfly skimmed across the surface of the water, leaving no trace, just like the thoughts we once believed to be of great importance, which in the end are only passing clouds across the sky, arriving and leaving without permission, without need for regret. When others do not act the way we expect, what we need is not to judge them, but to shine awareness on our own reactions. No one can make us suffer without the cooperation of the stories we tell ourselves. Realizing this, the young monk looked up, watching the leaf disappear downstream, his heart feeling weightless, not because the event had changed, but because the burden of meaning had quietly dissolved in the light of mindfulness. That evening, as mist began to settle over the stone paths of the temple, the young monk returned to his room with a very different spirit than when the morning began, no longer chasing or analyzing every gesture, every look. Instead, a quiet awareness had started to grow inside, like a slow burning flame. On the way, he noticed an old row of bamboos silently growing along the cliff wall, some stalks broken, others stretching upward toward the sun, yet all stood firmly, needing no one's approval, no proof of worth. In the same way, the human heart does not need validation to be at peace. It only needs to learn to pause exactly where it is, to witness what it feels, without needing to explain why things unfold the way they do. Since leaving home to live in the monastery, the young monk had carried an old habit, always trying to understand what others thought of him, as if his entire value depended on someone else's eyes. A vague comment could leave him adrift all day. A passing glance could spark endless speculation. But now, with the image of the drifting leaf still etched in memory, he realized he had spent most of his life energy resisting things that had never actually happened, defending a version of himself that others may never have seen, constantly negotiating with assumptions born from his own restless insecurity. The master had not needed to explain much, only to glance at the sky, to release a leaf, and in doing so, lit within the boy a new way of seeing. A way not built on, "Why did they do that?" but on, "What is my mind doing with this?" Someone might fall silent, not because they hate us, but because they are carrying something inside that needs to be held gently in silence. Someone might reply less often, not because they are pulling away, but perhaps because they are lost in a storm of worries we cannot imagine. Sometimes, we think we are the center of someone else's change, when in truth, every life is a vast universe with its own orbits, beyond our control, beyond our need to understand. Realizing this does not make us indifferent. It allows us to let go of unnecessary effort, to let the mind return to its natural state, like the sky after a rain. Free of dust, no longer clinging to the storm that just passed. The feeling of freedom does not come from people behaving the way we want, but from our ability to stop assigning meaning to every action, to stop writing exhausting stories in our minds. When the young monk sat down to meditate at the end of the day, it was no longer about trying to clear his thoughts as he used to. It was about facing each passing thought with a mind that no longer wished to control it. The memory of the silent friend from that morning might still be there, but it was no longer a question of, why did that happen? It became a whisper. I see now that I was afraid of something that was never real. In that stillness, he learned something that could not be found in books. That did not come from strict teachings. The most honest peace arises when we stop trying to explain everything, when we are brave enough to live with ambiguity, when we dare to walk into the gray areas of the mind without carrying the flashlight of logic. Night fell like a thick blanket wrapping the entire quiet landscape, and the sound of a distant Zen bell echoed like the universe's response to those who know how to sit still without asking for anything. In the young monk's heart, there was no longer turmoil, no longer a flood of what ifs and maybes, only a soft emptiness, where thoughts could come and go like birds crossing the sky without leaving a trace. Like a lesson that needs no teacher and no clear ending. As the deep purple spread across the night sky, and wind rustled a few dry leaves onto the temple courtyard, the young monk remained seated at the threshold. His eyes were open, but looking inward more than outward. The scattered sounds of life, the chirping of insects, the wind brushing the wind chimes under the eaves, were no longer distractions. They became the quiet rhythm of a deep contemplation growing within him. A day that seemed unremarkable, just a cold glance, a hesitant nod from a once close friend, had been enough to carry him from suspicion to disappointment. From a simple thought to a long story with no voices but his own. Suddenly, something the Zen master once said floated back like a wisp of smoke in the night. We do not suffer because of other people's actions, but because of the meanings we attach to those actions. The feeling of being pushed away often does not come from the other person, but from our own unsettled hearts, our fragility always craving affirmation, love, and to be seen clearly, even when we have not yet understood ourselves. Some silences do not mean rejection. They are just signs of weariness needing space. Some changes are not aimed at us. They are simply the natural shape of quiet growth. The mind, afraid of not knowing, reacts by creating theories, by inventing countless reasons for someone else's shift, yet rarely turns around to ask, what am I really afraid of? Maybe it is not sadness from being forgotten, but the pain of feeling our sense of safety shaken. Maybe it is not the heartbreak of someone turning away, but the emptiness of no longer seeing our reflection in them. With this insight, the young monk no longer blamed his friend, nor himself. He simply let out a long exhale, as if that breath carried with it a burden that had been waiting years for release. Every small experience of the day became a teaching without words. because his inner world had grown quiet enough to hear the whispers of truth. The master did not return to explain more, nor ask if the lesson had been learned, because he knew that every awakening has its own season. There was no need to rush understanding, no urgency to judge right or wrong. Just let time and honest observation do their work. Like water settling after a gust of wind, the mind returns to stillness when it no longer fights the disturbance. He once believed peace was a reward for mastering total control over emotion. But now he saw it came naturally, when we stop holding on to things that were never ours. Peace is not the absence of wounds, but the ability to face them without fear. It is not being loved in the right way, but not letting others' way of loving or not loving define our worth. Darkness stretched across the courtyard, blurring the line between earth and sky, leaving only a vast expanse, like a heart that has brushed away the dust on the mirror of its own mind. In that stillness, the young monk smiled, not because everything had become clear, but because he no longer needed it to be. The question, "Why are they like that?" stepped aside for a deeper one. How is my heart responding to this? And so, whether the friend returned or not, whether words of affection came or distance remained, he no longer stood waiting in the same place. He was no longer the child inside, longing for recognition, but a young practitioner learning to grow from within, not through cold detachment, but through understanding, not by eliminating emotion, but by holding it without being swept away. A gentle breeze stirred again. Dry leaves rustled under the eaves. The crescent moon rose above the mountain, casting light on the quiet face of a young soul learning to see life as drifting clouds, as crashing waves, as a reflection of himself across 1,000 surfaces, until finally, only one thing remained: a stillness that depended on no one, and could not be shaken by anything. In a small tea house nestled beneath the branches of an old cherry tree at the edge of a quiet village, petals fell silently into a white porcelain bowl on a wooden table. Tea Master Rikyu sat alone in a space carved by time and simplicity. People said he was a master of the sacred tea ceremony, where every drop of water, every wisp of steam, every clink of ceramic and bamboo became a ritual honoring the present moment. And yet, behind his calm exterior and movements as slow as the breath of the earth itself, there was an unspoken current in his heart, something that could not be named, yet lingered like the soft patter of rain in a silent night. It was the image of a woman named Yuki. Her name meant snow, not only evoking purity, but also the coldness of what cannot be held, a winter flower blooming out of season, destined never to belong. Yuki was a woman Rikyu had never touched, but in his imagination, he had poured tea for her countless times. They had never sat together, yet she lived in every grain of wood, every trail of smoke, every glaze of porcelain he carefully chose. Each morning, as the sunlight touched the edge of the veranda, he would prepare a tea set as if she were on her way. As if the perfection of space could somehow summon the impossible closer. He set out 2 cushions, poured 2 cups of tea, imagined a gentle conversation, a tender gaze, a quiet smile, but all of it existed only in the silent terrain of the mind, a place where love did not need to be returned to exist, where longing could burn quietly without promises, like the fire in a potter's kiln. Every time he brewed tea, he was not just boiling water or pouring it. He was shaping a dream out of sound and stillness. As if everything were just perfect enough, a miracle might happen. She would appear, walk in, sit down, and say that all the barriers had dissolved. But the seasons still changed. Cherry blossoms still bloomed and fell. And the woman named Yuki remained part of another world, a world bound by duty, titles, and practical choices that anchored her footsteps elsewhere. Then one spring afternoon, as the wind scattered petals like fragments of memory impossible to gather, Rikyu was making tea when his hands suddenly paused, as if something within him had just been set down. He looked at the empty teacup where he always imagined her hand lifting it, then gently returned it to its place. No sound, no sigh, a rare moment where sorrow did not need to be resisted, did not need explanation, but only needed to be seen clearly, through eyes no longer clouded by dreams. In that moment, he no longer felt like a man in love, but rather a man holding onto the image of love, an image so exquisite there was no room left for reality. The Yuki in his mind had become a symbol, no longer a person with her own changes, her own weariness, her own constraints, but a refined crystallization of something forever out of reach. That night, he made one final pot of tea, not for anyone, not because of anyone, but for himself. Every movement was still slow, deliberate, precise, but no longer carried the weight of waiting. When the water boiled, he did not dream of reunion. When the aroma rose, he did not imagine someone else breathing it in. It was simply presence, pure and full, in each step, each breath. The cup placed before him was like a ritual of farewell, not to someone far away, but to an ideal long held in the heart. As he brought the cup to his lips, he whispered, "Thank you for visiting my mind, even if only like snow falling in a dream. No tears, no smile, only a release so gentle it was barely felt, like a petal falling unseen." From that day on, Rikyu's tea ceremonies continued, perhaps even more refined than before, but without the urge to fill a void. That refinement no longer served to hold on to anything, but emerged as a result of letting go. In each of his movements, people no longer saw just the beauty of a master's skill. They sensed the peace of a soul that had learned to release love without losing gratitude. Rikyu did not love less, he had simply learned to love without clinging, to remember without gripping, to know without needing to understand. And so, in every tea ceremony that followed, he no longer imagined Yuki sitting across from him. Yet the warmth of compassion still lingered in the room, like the scent of tea in the air, not bold, but enduring, not clearly visible, but present long after everything else had gone quiet. Under the soft stretch of twilight across the old stone floor of the teahouse veranda, with the last traces of sunlight resting gently on the edge of the table, Rikyu sat in silence. His hands rested calmly on his knees, no longer preparing for a welcome that would never come. The scent of tea drifted through the wood slats, mingling with the chill of early wind, making the space feel both familiar and distant, just like the feeling he held for Yuki after letting go of her memory. The echoes of that old love did not vanish like smoke, nor shatter like broken porcelain glaze. Instead, they seeped quietly into the folds of time, into the calluses on his fingertips, into sighs that never reached the surface. He no longer made tea hoping for someone's presence, no longer decorated every detail hoping to impress. no longer searched for understanding from someone long out of reach. Instead, he filled the space with complete stillness, like a plain cup with no pattern, not lacking, but quietly abundant, holding more than anything that sparkled. Love, when gripped like an object, always tightens the heart, like a string pulled too tight on an instrument, ready to snap, like a seed crushed too hard, unable to sprout. Rikyu realized he had spent many years in a quiet ritual of waiting, not for someone to arrive, but for another version of himself to appear, a self worthy enough to be loved, perfect enough not to be rejected. That yearning had soaked into every tea gathering like an underground spring flowing through invisible layers of earth, making every silence a surface shell, while deep underneath, there were always small cracks. But from the day he realized he had been loving a figure crafted by his own imagination, his awareness began peeling back each attachment, like a potter brushing off excess glaze from the surface of a bowl. From then on, whenever he lifted a cup, he no longer thought of Yuki as someone lost, nor did he see that love as a mistake to erase. He simply let it be, like a breeze that had passed, leaving behind the scent of scorched grass deep in the soil. He did not retell the story, did not blame fate, did not lean on circumstance to justify his feelings. His way of keeping love was by letting it go, not through denial, but through clarity, as if he had finally understood. Love does not have to mean possession, does not need to end in response, does not always walk its full path in the real world. Sometimes, just once appearing in someone's heart is enough to become a part of life forever. Later, students who came to study tea with Rikyu noticed something different in his ceremonies, nothing extravagant, nothing grand, but something so moving it could not be named. Some wept at the sound of water being poured into a cup. Others fell silent before a single dried flower leaning quietly in a corner, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. So real it did not need to try to be beautiful. Rikyu never spoke of Yuki, but those around him could feel something deep and light, like an old piece of cloth neatly folded and placed in the drawer of memory. Not to show, not to seek pity, but simply to honor the fact that it once existed. On a late autumn day, as rain tapped gently on moss-covered roof tiles, he brewed tea for one, as always, but this time, something was different. He no longer imagined anyone sitting across from him, no longer held silent conversations with memories. He simply made tea, as natural as a tree rustling when the wind comes, as a stream flowing over stones without leaving footprints. In the steam rising from the cup, he saw his own face, older than before, quieter than before, but freer than ever. Yuki was no longer pain, no longer a dream, but a hidden spring that once ran through barren soil, softening it, awakening seeds, and then vanishing, as if she had never stayed. And perhaps, that is the sign of a mature love, not one that needs proof, not one that clings to remain, but one that continues to live quietly and beautifully, like a cup of tea that stays warm on the table, even when no one drinks it. Morning in the temple courtyard was painted with a thin veil of mist in the first golden rays of sunlight. Each stone on the path shimmered as if someone had polished them clean through the night. In a corner where the wind whispered through a grove of bamboo, a young woman named Pema knelt silently beside a stack of bronze mirrors she had just finished polishing. Her face was damp with sweat. Her eyes still clouded by a constant sense of worry. Her job was to clean the mirrors used by the monks every morning. A task that seemed simple and repetitive, but inside Pema, it had become a reflection of a growing insecurity she could no longer name. Every time someone passed without smiling, every fleeting glance, every whisper between the young novices, she interpreted as signs of judgment, disappointment, or even disdain. In her mind, everyone in the monastery was scrutinizing her every gesture, measuring her worth by the tiniest scratch left on the surface of a mirror, though in truth, perhaps no one thought about it for more than a moment. Since leaving her village to live and serve at the mountain temple, Pema had carried with her a deep longing for approval and praise. As if those things could erase an invisible feeling of inadequacy. Though others often called her diligent, kind, and hard-working, deep down, she never truly believed she was good enough. That was why every silence, every missed reply, felt like a shard of glass stabbing into her already fragile self-doubt. She did not live in the present, but in a play built on assumptions. That one person was disappointed. Another was laughing at her. Someone else had stopped caring. While those around her went about their daily routines, Pema was engaged in non-stop conversations with imaginary versions of them inside her own head. She once thought she was humble, but now she realized that being overly focused on how others perceived her was simply another form of ego. This ego wore the mask of shyness but secretly tried to control how others thought of her in order to feel safe. That morning, as she polished the final mirror, her hands began to tremble slightly at the sight of the dark brown robe of the old Zen master Tenzin approaching from afar. His expression revealed nothing, and her heart pounded harder. But instead of walking past her as usual, he stopped, picked up a mirror that gleamed brightly in the sunlight, and held it up to catch the slanting rays through the pine trees. His voice was calm, resonating like a bell in her restless mind. "What do you see in this mirror?" Pema bowed her head and answered hesitantly. "I see my face. I see tiredness. I see anxious eyes." The master nodded, then asked, "And does the mirror have any opinion about your face?" She froze, then slowly shook her head. "No, the mirror does not think anything. It just reflects." A gentle smile passed across his face. He placed the mirror back and said, "Then when you look at others, are you truly seeing them, or only seeing what you think they are thinking about you?" The question struck her like cold water poured directly onto the deepest layer of her mind, shattering every complex thought at once to reveal a raw truth. All this time, she had not truly seen anyone. She had only been bouncing off reflections born from her own fear of rejection. Every face she encountered had become a surface onto which she projected her inner anxieties. Every glance had become evidence in a trial where she herself was the accused, the judge, and the jury. She had been living inside a house of mirrors, but each one only reflected her own doubt, not the objective world around her. After that morning, Pema could not stop thinking about the master's words. She began to notice her inner reactions every time someone was silent, every time a glance passed by. But this time, instead of immediately believing her usual interpretations, she asked herself, "Is this real? Or is it just my thought about what they might be thinking?" She began to understand that most of her insecurity did not come from others, but from her own relentless self-judgment shaped by imagination. When someone smiled, instead of thinking they were mocking her, she allowed herself to believe they might simply be happy. When someone was quiet, instead of assuming they were upset with her, she left room for the possibility that they were just living through stories she could not know. From that space, she began to learn how to see life with mirror-like eyes, clear but without judgment, present without coloring things with personal assumptions. Gradually, a lightness returned, like the long sigh of someone finally setting down a suitcase they had carried for too long. She realized she did not need everyone to love her in order to live kindly. She only needed to stop making a home in other people's minds in order to return home to herself. That evening, after finishing her daily tasks, Pema poured herself a small cup of tea and sat by the veranda, watching the sunset turn the grass and stones of the courtyard golden. Everything unfolded as it always did, but inside her, the swirling thoughts no longer stirred like before. She no longer silently counted who had looked at her today, who had avoided her eyes, who had forgotten to say good morning. Instead, she felt her own presence within the scene, a presence that needed no proof, no recognition, only the chance to live fully in each breath, each sip of tea, each small gesture. This shift did not come from a magical chant or a profound sermon. It came from the moment she realized how much time she had lost trying to become a good image in other people's eyes, and how little care she had given to the eyes through which she herself looked at life. In the days that followed, Pema still did the same tasks, still polished mirrors, still picked up dry leaves, still swept the veranda each morning, but her mindset had transformed. When polishing the mirrors, she no longer asked whether someone would notice her effort. She no longer worried if the surface was shiny enough to earn praise. She simply focused on each motion, each breath, as if every stroke was a chance to return to herself, to see her own mind in the reflection. Not to judge, but to understand. Each mirror became a silent practice, a place where she learned to see without attachment, to know without clinging, to care without needing repayment. And something beautiful happened, the moment she stopped seeking eyes of approval. Those eyes began to turn toward her. The young novices sometimes stopped to say thank you. A few nuns complimented her, saying the mirrors were brighter than ever. But Pema simply smiled gently, because she no longer relied on those words to feel whole. One morning, as she carried the mirrors into the meditation hall, a visiting guest who had just finished bowing to the monks asked, "Who takes care of these mirrors?" She bowed and answered softly, not out of shyness, but because she no longer needed to stand out. The guest nodded slowly and said, as if to himself, "A mirror shines because it is polished every day. And a heart shines when it knows how to reflect without judging." That sentence touched her like a quiet confirmation of the path she was walking, not dazzling, not grand, but deeply true. From that day, Pema began writing a few lines in a journal each night, not to retell the day's events, but to record the moments when her mind started slipping back into its old habits, assuming, imagining, fearing. Each sentence became a mirror, each page a new reflection, helping her see. The stiller the heart, the clearer the world. 1 year later, on the full moon night of autumn, when the moon hung round like a mirror in the sky, Pema sat in meditation by the lotus pond behind the temple. The still water reflected the bright moon, and reflected her silhouette, unmoving between earth and sky. The wind did not blow. The leaves did not fall. Only the sound of her heartbeat echoed softly like a distant temple bell. She knew that had she sat here a year ago, her mind would have been filled with questions. Is someone watching me? Am I sitting straight enough? Beautiful enough? Is someone judging the way I meditate? But now, those thoughts had dissolved into the night like wisps of smoke. There was no one in her head anymore, only the quiet presence of breath, of an empty mind. And a heart like the surface of the lake, calm, deep, reflecting the moon without needing anyone to say it is beautiful. In that moment, she understood she had truly stepped out of the house full of mirrors that once reflected her worries. There was no need to escape it, no need to destroy it, just no longer looking into it to find herself. She had not become someone else, had not disappeared from the world. She had simply returned to the one place that mattered, the place where one no longer lives inside the imagined gaze of others, but walks freely in the simple light of their own being. Beneath a snow-covered mountain, where an old monastery nestled among ancient pine trees, there lived a Zen master who led an almost reclusive life. He did not teach before crowds, did not write books, did not preach. He simply swept the courtyard, carried water, and sometimes sat beside a large rock, watching clouds drift through the valley. People called him the firekeeper, not because he tended the hearth in the monastery, but because anyone who met him, even once, felt a quiet flame light up within, even if they did not understand why. One bitterly cold winter, a young traveler from afar arrived at the monastery after days lost in the snow. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, his feet bloodied, and his spirit cut through with invisible wounds from modern life. He had not come seeking wisdom, only because he had heard whispers of a Zen master who understood what could not be said, who could soothe pains that even the one carrying them could not name. When he was led to the back courtyard where the master was building a fire, the young man bowed, silent, as if afraid to disturb the stillness surrounding them. The master asked no questions, gave no greeting, invited him to sit without a word. He simply handed the young man a piece of wood and gestured for him to help with the fire. The flame leapt up inside the cracked earthen stove, casting light that danced across the stone walls like memories rising from the past. They sat beside each other all afternoon without a single word, listening to the wind howl through the cracks, the fire crackle and hiss, and occasionally, a sigh from one of them, though it was unclear from whom. Finally, as evening fell, the Zen master gently spoke. Your thoughts are like snow falling. If you try to catch them, your hands will grow cold. If you fight them, you will grow tired. Only when you let the snow fall and melt will you see the ground beneath. That simple sentence pierced the thick armor of logic, touching a place inside the young man no one had ever reached. For so long, he had lived with a tension he could not name, unfulfilled expectations, criticism that cut deep, dreams that were forced to grow faster than his feelings could keep up. He had believed he needed to fix everything before he could be at peace. Believed that healing required understanding every cause of his pain. But sitting beside that fire, he realized some things do not need to be unraveled, they need to be held. Some thoughts do not need to be controlled, they just need to pass through. Peace, he saw, was not a blank mind. It was a mind that no longer reacted blindly to everything it produced. Just like the Zen master did not chase sparks or cling to ashes, he simply added wood when needed, and sheltered the flame from strong winds, so it burned evenly without flaring into chaos. The next morning, the young man awoke to the sound of birds echoing through the mountains, not with fear or confusion, but with a stillness he had never known. His mind felt cleared, not by force, but by facing what he had once tried to escape. He stepped outside and saw the Zen master washing clothes by the shallow stream. His hands moved steadily, his gaze soft. No one had taught him a lesson, but the student had begun to understand through silence. Not every question needs an answer. Not every wound needs dissection. Sometimes, healing lives in the ability to put the questions down, to sit quietly beside pain the way one might sit beside a crying child, not fixing, not scolding, just staying, not walking away. That afternoon, before leaving the monastery, the young man bowed in gratitude, not because the master had explained something profound, but because he had shown him a kind of peace that did not require struggle to earn. A kind of peace that comes from sitting by a fire without needing to control its heat, from letting snow fall without brushing it away, from living alongside imperfection without needing to immediately repair it. As he descended the mountain, he carried no teachings or scriptures, only a memory as clear as still water, the warm glow of fire in the earthen stove, the crackle of burning wood, and one sentence like a quiet mantra with no magic but enough power to calm a storm: let the snow fall. You will see the ground. Along the mossy path that led down into the valley, the young man walked in a silence that soaked into his every step, not the silence of loneliness, but the stillness of someone who had finally returned to himself after years of running away. The sharp turns he once feared now felt gentle, as if his heart no longer resisted, and so the path itself softened with him. Each step no longer carried a purpose to arrive, or a goal to achieve. He walked simply because he was alive. He walked because he was present. The wind moved through the leaves, carrying the scent of melting snow and pine resin. It reminded him of last night, when the fire burned low. The Zen master had looked at him for a long time, then slowly said, "There are mountains that do not need to be conquered, only watched. There are wounds that do not need to be healed, only sat beside." That sentence rang like a lullaby for the part of his soul that had long been awakened only by scolding, pressure, and comparison. He had spent years in a world where every emotion needed a reason. Every sadness needed analysis. Every pain needed a villain. But now, for the first time, he allowed himself to feel, without needing to understand. As the path unfolded, old thoughts fell away like dried leaves. He remembered a childhood where no one taught how to be with feelings, only how to be better, stronger, smarter than others. Every time he cried, he was told to stop. Every time he felt sad, he was urged to smile. No one was wrong in how they loved, but they left behind a void he had tried to fill with roles that never fit. The positive one, the wise one, the successful one. When those roles became too tight, he could no longer breathe, but kept performing, having forgotten who he was when not pretending to be anything. Sitting by the fire last night in the freezing cold, he had finally allowed himself not to know, not to fix, not to hold it all together. In the small flicker of flame, he saw himself, not the polished image, but the soft, neglected part left behind. The child who once only wanted to be held without questions. To be sad without correction. As the mountain's shadow stretched across the valley, he encountered a group of villagers carrying bundles of firewood. They asked if he was lost. He smiled and shook his head, saying that he had already found his way, not a path on any map, but the way home within his heart. They did not fully understand what he meant, but in his eyes, they saw such ease that each of them gave a quiet nod. Further along the trail, he paused by a large flat stone, sat down, and listened to the wind weaving through the dry branches. He remembered the moments of silence at the monastery, the drip of water, the wind brushing through the cracks of old wooden doors, the silent gaze of the old Zen master. Those seemingly small things turned out to be the gateway to a place he once believed could only be reached by climbing high, achieving much, or becoming someone extraordinary. But peace, he realized, did not reside in accomplishments or praise. It lived in the courage to face oneself without turning away. When he stood up, a dusting of snow slid off his coat. He did not brush it away, but let it melt slowly in the sunlight. There was no longer a weight of expectation on his shoulders, no longer an obsession with becoming someone else. He walked, not for anyone, not to prove anything, but simply to live as himself. Not perfect, but real. In his heart, the master's words still echoed, not like philosophy, but like breath. There are things that cannot be explained. They can only be lived. It was a lesson not written down, not bound in books, not preached before crowds, but those who had truly hurt, truly searched, truly grown weary, they would understand. The small flames in our hearts, if allowed to burn quietly long enough, will find their way. They do not need to be stoked or made to blaze. They just need not be extinguished. That night, back in the small house at the foot of the mountain, the young man sat alone beside an open window. The street lights reflected off the rain-damp pavement below, and his heart no longer stirred the way it once had. The same room that used to echo with endless thoughts now only held the steady ticking of an old clock and the rhythm of his breath. No urgent messages to reply to. No emails waiting. No noise from an ego trying to prove something to the outside world. Everything had receded, making room for a quiet emptiness that no longer felt threatening, like a garden freshly cleared of weeds, where the wind could pass through without resistance. He did not sleep that night, but he did not toss and turn. He simply listened to the movements inside himself. Old memories he thought had vanished returned, but no longer stung. Dreams that once shouted became as soft as a shawl laid gently on his shoulders in winter. Toward morning, he made a pot of tea. Each motion was slow, not for effect, but because there was no rush. The rising steam reminded him of the faint smoke from the earthen stove at the monastery, where the old master sat as still as a stone. And yet, from that stillness emanated a strange life force that calmed all who came near. He had never met anyone who spoke so little yet made everything so clear. Never known someone who offered no advice yet inspired such deep change. Perhaps it was because the master did not try to change anyone, that people who came near naturally began to change. Perhaps because he did not try to heal anyone, that those who were hurt stopped resisting and began to heal on their own. As the first light of day streamed through the window, he looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Everything was just as it had been, the scratched wooden table, the faded curtains, the notebook crooked on the shelf. But now it all seemed to breathe with him. No longer a backdrop for a life that had to be held together, but part of a life that could simply be lived. In the past, every morning began with thoughts of what he needed to do to be better, to succeed, to avoid falling behind. But now, the only thing he wanted was not to be swept away again. Not because he was giving up, but because he understood. Our worth is not in proving how different we are, but in being fully present in the most ordinary moments. In the days that followed, nothing major changed. He still did his job. He still met familiar faces. He still walked the same unremarkable streets. But inside, he knew he was no longer the same. Situations that once triggered panic now passed through him like ripples on water. Words that used to tighten his chest now floated by like wind under the eaves. He no longer reacted the moment a feeling arose. He had learned to pause, take a deep breath, and let the wind within him settle before stepping forward. Each night before bed, he lit a small stick of incense, not for any specific belief, but as a quiet reminder: keep the fire. It does not have to burn bright. It just has to stay lit. One afternoon, sitting in a small cafe at the end of the street, he overheard someone speaking about a friend in crisis. He did not interrupt, did not offer advice. He just looked at them with the same gaze the Zen master had once given him. A gaze that did not try to understand, did not analyze, did not guide. It simply remained. The other person fell silent, then exhaled deeply, as if they had just set down a heavy burden they had not even realized they were carrying. In that moment, he understood. Healing does not come from effort, knowledge, or technique. It comes from a silence wide enough to let someone simply be, without fear of being fixed. As the master once said, the firekeeper does not need to do much. He only needs not to let the fire go out. That light, if it stays alive in him, will light the way for himself. And one day, it may light the way for others too, without a single word spoken. On a train cutting through the forest in late autumn, as leaves turned bronze and drifted onto the tracks, a young seeker sat by the fogged-up window, a worn notebook in hand. His gaze followed the scenery rushing by. In his expression, people could see weariness mingled with longing, a quiet hunger to step out of the rhythm of modern life and into something deeper, quieter, more real. But he did not yet know where he was going, or whether anything was truly waiting. He had just left a stable job in the city, a place of endless meetings and hollow compliments. After a sleepless night, he realized he had been alive for years without really living, chasing things that seemed important but had left his soul threadbare. This journey had no clear destination. Only a vague recommendation about a mountain monastery and an old monk who was once famous not for his powerful sermons, but because he almost never gave one. He simply lived, and people learned from the way he lived. When he stepped onto the first stone leading up to the temple gate, he felt nothing extraordinary. No bell tolled, no majestic scenery appeared. Instead, there was a row of low buildings with dark wooden roofs, a few water jars by the path, and some wildflowers bending in the breeze. The Zen master was sweeping the courtyard, a frail figure in a faded brown robe, moving his bamboo broom with a steady scratch like the calm pulse of a heart. He stood there quietly, unsure of how to greet him. The master glanced, nodded lightly, without question or instruction, then turned and entered the building on the left. A senior novice led him to a small room and said that if he wished to stay, he should rise at dawn, around 5 a.m., help in the kitchen silently, and not speak much. He nodded, unbothered, because the simplicity of that welcome made him feel more at ease than any grand greeting could. The following days unfolded like a slow-motion film, no dramatic peaks, no special events. Each morning he woke before dawn, helped the cook build the fire, rinse vegetables, carry water. At midday he ate in silence, in the afternoon he swept the courtyard, in the evening he meditated beneath an old Bodhi tree. He expected to receive a lesson, a teaching, a stirring in the depths of his being like he had read about in books. But the master said nothing. He simply ate slowly, walked slowly, breathed evenly, folded his blanket neatly, and picked up fallen leaves as if each was the most important task in the world. At first, he felt restless, empty, abandoned, but gradually, when the external world quieted down, he began to sense the subtle stirrings within, fear trembling in the silence, sadness drifting by like smoke, old ambition hovering at the edge of awareness, waiting for him to look back and nurture it. One afternoon, while washing dishes by the well, the cold water biting his hands, he suddenly remembered his mother washing his clothes as a child, tucking a pair of old knitted gloves into his hand for warmth. The memory didn't make him cry. It made him soften, a kind of tenderness he had long forgotten. Looking down at the water's surface and seeing his reflection, he no longer saw the man who had to be strong, upright, successful, but someone learning how to come home. In that moment, there were no Zen verses, no philosophy, only the stark truth. You do not need to become someone else in order to deserve life. That evening, as he finished eating and prepared to wash up, the master spoke for the first time, slowly, like wind passing through the forest. It is not because of what you do that you become enough, but because you are enough that you can act with ease. Those words made him stop mid-movement, as if someone had just pulled an arrow from his chest. All the years living to prove he was not ordinary, that he deserved love, that he had value, it all suddenly felt as light as ash. He realized he did not need to strive to become a better version of himself to be worthy. True change does not come from forcing oneself to live differently, but from daring to live authentically, even when that means being sad or tired or unsure. In the days that followed, he no longer sought lessons or special experiences. He simply lived like the people in the temple, carrying water, washing vegetables, sitting quietly, breathing gently, as if each moment were itself a practice of the way. And in that simple living, he became not someone searching but someone returning. On the full moon night 3 weeks later, when the moon rose behind the mountain and bathed the red brick courtyard in silver light, the young meditator sat quietly on the stone step before the meditation hall, hands resting lightly on his knees, eyes softly closed, his breath as thin and fragile as wind-rustling leaves. No one was beside him, no chanting, no guided voice, only the steady presence of the earth beneath him, the silent generosity of the sky above, and a tranquility at once strange and deeply familiar, as if encountering an old friend unexpectedly. In that state, he no longer felt compelled to ask questions, to find something profound from the master. or even to consider leaving. Presence itself became full, without needing to be explained, like the moon that shines perfectly when the time is right. Without needing praise, a senior novice passed by and placed a cup of hot tea in his hands, then silently moved on. The warmth spreading through his palms brought him something he had never felt in all the years he lived in the city. Kindness so subtle that unless one is fully present, it can slip by unnoticed, like the master's slow nod each morning. The towel someone left by the wash basin. The rock placed carefully to prevent a door from slamming shut. Those small gestures, once overshadowed by grandeur and noise in his old world, now felt more precious than any lofty teaching. Perhaps it is the silence that does not need to assert itself that speaks most deeply of sincere compassion, a compassion without conditions, without response, without spectacle. Night fell and the air grew colder. But his heart no longer contracted as it once did. The chill felt now not like lack, but like a natural part of the air. The mountains, the rhythm of life. A thin blanket warmed him easily because his heart no longer resisted the cold. Each breath became an unspoken mantra. Each heartbeat, confirmation that he was alive, but this time, living not to race, but to listen. That night, he wrote a few lines in his small notebook, not to preserve them forever, but to mark where he had been, to record the fact that he had learned to live slowly enough to hear snow falling in his own heart. The next morning, before dawn, the master sat beside him in the vegetable garden, where tender mustard greens were just sprouting. He said nothing, offered no teaching, only pointed at a delicate leaf growing upward. Then calmly asked, "Why isn't it in a hurry?" The question made him smile, not out of amusement, but because he recognized how often he had pushed himself to grow too fast, to mature too early, to shine before his time, while that leaf, that sprout, simply lived at the pace of earth and sky, needing no plan, no achievement, only the chance not to be uprooted too soon. That alone held a lesson deeper than all the philosophies he had read. When the day came to depart, no one held him, no one bade farewell. The Zen master simply nodded and placed a small stone in his hand, not polished or remarkable, but cool, weighty, and real. It carried no specific meaning, but holding it, he felt as though he held 3 weeks of practice. Sleepless nights, unanswered questions, unnamed peace. On his return to the old world, he was no longer the same person. Even amid the city, the routines, the pressures, deep inside, a door had opened, a door no one needs to see or confirm, yet wide enough for him to return to whenever weariness came. It is the home of memory, the simple temple roof, the brush of the bamboo broom on the courtyard, the master's silent eyes, the sprout in the mist, and that recurring question, "Why isn't it in a rush?" From that day onward, he no longer filled his journal as densely as before, nor felt the need to record every lesson lest he forget. The blank pages became fewer, but each line was richer, like living not chasing big ideas, but returning to the smallest details of each day. Every morning, before opening his phone, he spent 5 minutes sitting quietly, not following any ritual, just listening to the space around him, distant traffic, leaves drifting outside the window, and his own heart gradually returning as water flowing back after a long absence. When he made tea, he no longer multitasked by planning or worrying. Instead, he focused on the rising steam, the soft aroma, the warmth spreading in his hands, as if embracing the whole morning. At first, his family and friends didn't notice anything obvious had changed. They only saw that he spoke less. But his gaze had softened. He reacted more slowly. Yet his smile was more frequent. He no longer rushed to advise others but listened quietly. He stopped sharing tales of success. Instead, he spoke of simple things. What he learned from a leaf falling by the road, or how an elderly street vendor smiled each morning. Rain or shine, intense conversations. He no longer felt the need to prove himself right or receive validation. Instead, he grounded himself with a steady presence. Like a tree. Whether the other person stirred or not. Not because he was indifferent, but because he understood. Most of those storms were not aimed at him, but born of pain unembraced, ununderstood, unaccepted, much like he had been, wandering in search of something to make sense of his own misalignment. Sometimes, sitting at a small cafe beside the lake, when wind dragged dry leaves across the water, he was reminded of the Zen master's look when placing that small stone in his hand, not sad, not joyful, just pure presence, without attachment. He no longer kept the stone as something sacred, but placed it on his desk as a silent reminder that some things cannot be analyzed or controlled, only accompanied. Like loneliness visiting sometimes. Or a sudden ache of helplessness, not enemies, but guests needing a seat in silence. Without judgment, he let them remain as long as they wanted, no invitation, no eviction, just coexisting. Like the nights in the monastery when he made peace with falling snow. Not by melting it, but by being friend the chill. One day, during the casual, "What did you learn outside work?" session at his company, he shared a simple story from the monastery. Watching a snail crawl slowly across a wet stone step. He didn't know where it was going. And yet it didn't worry, only moved each tiny step with focus. He said that since then, whenever he felt he was hurrying so fast he didn't know what he was doing, he closed his eyes and pictured that snail. The room fell silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. Others nodded. No one spoke. But he didn't feel any need to respond. Because he had learned to let things arrive and depart without tying them down with expectations. These stories didn't make his life outstanding, but they made each morning lighter. Each day no longer felt like a race with no finish line. Before sleep, he often lit a small candle, not out of religion but to watch the faint flame in the dark. Reminding himself that he didn't need to be a great torchbearer to light the way. Sometimes a small spark in the heart is enough, to take each step steadily. To smile at another day well lived, though imperfect, yet authentic, full, and complete, no longer seeking external lessons. He began to listen to what the master had never said aloud, but those truths emerged when he sat in true stillness. Like the moon that doesn't try to shine. Like a leaf that doesn't try to be beautiful. Like the teacher who didn't teach but whose life left a lesson that followed him forever. Outside a remote village, hidden behind bamboo groves and low hills, there stood a small wooden bridge across a perennial stream. Every morning, an old man sat there holding a simple fishing pole, yet he never looked at the water. Instead, he gazed toward the distant woods as if waiting for something that would never come. The villagers called him the fisherman of nothingness, since he never caught fish and rarely spoke, except once nodding at children who ran past. A young monk, walking the path of alms, stopped in the village and saw this scene. Curiosity led him to sit beside the old man. No formal greeting, no sutra reading, just a youth and an elder in silent company. Dressed in faded robes, gazing at the clear water flowing beneath the bridge. The breeze danced on the stream, scattering light patches like unfinished thoughts. After a time, the young monk softly asked, "Do you sit here every day waiting for fish? Or waiting to forget time?" The old man didn't immediately answer or even turn toward him. Instead, he slowly lifted the fishing line from the water, no hook, then gently laid it back. After a long silence, he spoke, "There's no need to catch fish. There's no need to forget time. What matters is not letting your heart be tugged by either." Those words stunned the young monk, not just a casual reply, but as if a door had opened into a vast, boundless realm where ordinary concepts like gain and loss, right and wrong, going and arriving no longer carried weight. Like that fishing pole, it symbolized an act but transcended purpose. The monk had been taught about meditation, precepts, impermanence, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, but no one had told him that some teachings aren't in scriptures. They live in witnessing someone embody the Dharma. Sitting longer beside the old man, the monk realized something he'd never understood on his path. Enlightenment doesn't always come after austere practice or elevated spiritual states. But sometimes in the moment you no longer wish to go anywhere else. To be anyone else. To surpass the present. That sensation was neither joy nor ease, but a wordless serenity. As if, in that instant, all his withheld questions dissolved into the stream, and his grasp on objectives floated away. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the old man gathered his pole and rose, no farewell. Only a light hand on the young monk's shoulder, as gentle as a breeze touching a lotus petal. Then he walked to the flooded rice field that shimmered under the golden sunset. The young monk stayed seated, not because he didn't want to move, but because he didn't feel the need to go anywhere anymore. The bridge, the flowing stream, the baitless fishing pole, the gaze untethered, all taught him a silent lesson without words, without interpretation, without need for approval. When he left the village the next morning, he carried no souvenirs, only a lesson deeper than any scripture. That some presences do not teach you anything specific. Yet by simply being present wholly, they teach you everything. On the narrow dirt road leading out of the village, each footstep felt lighter than the dry leaves scattered across the ground, because in his heart, he no longer carried the restless urgency to find something ahead. In the years before, he had traveled through many lands, entered renowned monasteries, met skilled teachers, meticulously recorded every teaching, striving to practice every breath with sincere intention to discover the truth that could free him from inner turmoil. Yet now, after one afternoon sitting beside an ordinary old man with no title, no doctrine, no extraordinary wisdom, he felt an astonishing lightness. No profound teachings were offered, no mantras spoken, just the simple example of someone living slowly, quietly, authentically, and that was enough to usher a young monk into true maturity. Before leaving, he returned once more to the wooden bridge where they had sat in complete silence the day before. The stream still flowed, its clear water reflecting the drifting white clouds above, A single leaf floated in a gentle swirl before the bridge, then silently drifted away with the current. He stood motionless for a long time, for he saw in that leaf the symbol of his own journey. A leaf cannot choose where it was born, nor steer where it will go. Yet by surrendering to the water's flow, it arrives where it needs to be with the greatest ease. A monk's life, or indeed any life, is ultimately a journey of learning to drift in awareness, rather than resisting everything out of nameless fear. As sunlight danced across the water like 1,000 tiny eyes smiling at him, he folded his hands in salute, not toward the old man, nor necessarily anything divine, but as a silent expression of gratitude to life's subtle arrangement that allowed him to witness such ultimate simplicity. From that day forward, he continued his journey, passing through villages, receiving meal offerings, giving guidance when needed, but he no longer saw himself as someone who had something to transmit. He realized that what truly touches hearts isn't knowledge, but presence, the way we show up, how we listen, how slowly we live, and how steadfastly we can allow someone to sit beside us without feeling pressured to become someone else. Years later, during a Dharma talk in a small wooden hermitage amidst pine trees, a listener asked, "Venerable, what has been the greatest lesson on your spiritual path?" The abbot, now elderly with silvered hair and lines etched deep around his eyes, paused in silence. Then quietly recounted the tale of the fisherman with no hook, not with dramatic flair, not emphasizing the miraculous, just sharing something ordinary that happened in life. When the listener asked, "What made that story your greatest lesson?" the abbot smiled and said, "Because since that moment, I no longer felt I needed to learn anything more." As the wind rustled through the pine grove, that answer sparked a stillness deep in listeners' hearts, an unexplainable peace that could only be felt by minds that had let go of resistance. When he left the hermitage, he didn't retrace the old stone path back to the main temple. Instead, he walked alongside the quiet stream, the same stream that had long ago reminded him of the wooden bridge and his younger self. Lost in doubt and yearning for greatness, every step he took was now as delicate as dew on grass, no haste, no expectation of reaching somewhere particular, no hunger for inspiration. The trees along the path cast soft shadows on the damp grass, as though they had always known. They don't need attention to serve their purpose, to shelter, to shade, to shed leaves, to breathe softly in place. And within his heart, the memory of the old fisherman was no longer a milestone in his personal story. It had become a subtle undercurrent, a hum beneath every teaching he gave. Every moment he sat with others, every instant he gazed at the sky alone. Some students once asked him, "How can we recognize someone who has truly realized?" A question that once troubled him when he was young, but no longer stirred his heart. He did not answer with criteria, signs, or scripture. He only told them. Once, in a cold wind, he saw an elderly person carefully arranging small bundles of straw by a field. The movements were so unhurried that time seemed to stop. He stood and watched, not moved by pity or admiration, but because his mind cleared. His heart felt as transparent as still water. From that moment, he knew, those who live fully in each small moment, without display, without proof, without needing to be understood, are walking the way. Even if they haven't studied any teaching, That's why he never hurried to urge anyone to abandon suffering, nor tried to pull others out of confusion, because he understood that everyone has their own bridge, their own stream, their own old fisherman. Only in absolute silence can they meet him. In that wild mountain forest, he sat on a moss-covered rock and closed his eyes. He let every sound slip into his ears without judgment or label: the birdsong, the wind's whisper, the water striking stone, like a symphony with no conductor, yet perfect without correction. A squirrel scurried past, paused to look at him, then vanished into the underbrush, leaving no mark, causing no surprise or smile. Those moments came and went quietly, but left something immense: the sense of living amid all beings with no separation, with no need for labels. If someone saw that scene, they might think a monk was meditating in nature. But for him, no meditation was occurring, nor any special state. He was simply present, completely, and no longer intended to separate himself from anything. When dusk began to dye the distant canopy in shades of purple, he stood, brushed his robe, and walked forward without looking back, not because there was nothing memorable behind him, but because ahead or behind were now the same, both merely points along a single endless river of life. He had heard people say that spiritual practice is a journey beyond samsara. But now he no longer saw anything to escape. If samsara is formed of each step, each breath, each ordinary and profound day, then that is liberation itself. Like the fisherman who doesn't need fish, like the pole without a hook, like the stream flowing with no destination. Together they tell the same truth. Just living fully in this moment is enough to illuminate an entire lifetime. On the peak of a mountain perpetually shrouded in mist, there rested a small hermitage nestled among ancient pines, accessible only to those with a sincere heart set on the Dharma, willing to endure the slippery, winding forest path to arrive. Within this hermitage lived an elder monk whose real name was unknown, simply referred to as the hidden master. For he cared not for fame, never taught before crowds, nor followed conventional methods. Those fortunate enough to stay with him lived like secluded farmers in the wild, cooking, chopping wood, drawing water, clearing leaves. Every daily act was their own. There were no lecture halls, no echoing sutras, no rhythmic temple bells common in lowland monasteries. The entire space felt like a full, quiet pulse of life, where each breath carried a silent teaching and each task became ritual. In such simplicity, conventional notions of practice melted away, because that very simplicity was the field where the mind found stillness and saw itself. One afternoon, heavy rain roared through the deep forest. Water cascaded down rock crevices like silver threads until birds clustered under moss-covered eaves. And the chill crept between fingers. A young man from afar arrived, tattered clothing, red-rimmed eyes, clutching a crumpled letter. He asked humbly to stay. The elder neither inquired nor judged, but quietly replied, "If you do not fear the mountain, stay." It was neither greeting nor warning, simply a silent recognition entering between two souls who needed no words. That first day, the young man barely spoke. He bowed and did each task assigned, yet within his eyes lingered confusion, wounds unhealed, and many questions left unanswered. The rain continued 3 days and nights, softening the earth, slipping the paths, soaking the wood, rotting the vegetables, but no one at the hermitage complained. Everyone did their assigned work with calm rotation, no rush, no bitterness, no avoidance. The young man was given kitchen duty, a simple-sounding task made difficult by damp cold. After 2 failed attempts, failing to get a fire, wet wood, smoke stinging his eyes, he threw the wood aside, stormed to the back, collapsing in despair. The elder monk was quietly peeling beans at the entrance, offered no rebuke, made no eye contact. He simply placed a cup of warm tea beside the youth, then continued his own work, unaffected. After a time, the young man returned, not to apologize or explain, but silently gathered the wet wood, wiped each piece, carefully stacked them. When the first flame finally rose under the kettle and warmth filled the kitchen, tears stung his eyes, not from smoke, but because for the first time he understood. It is not results alone that matter, but the fact that he stayed that forms an outcome in itself. The next morning, just as sunlight eased through, the elder brought out a hammer and a wet log, asking him to split it for drying. Each strike was a test of patience. The wood was heavy, the grain stubborn, cracks appeared not as planned. But after yesterday's lesson, the young man felt no urgency, no complaints. He focused only on the sound of wood under the hammer, the vibration through his palms, sweat tracing down his forehead, cold biting his fingers, but a warmth rose in his heart, a fire not from flame, but from presence, truly being in each motion. When the last log was split and neatly aligned by the porch, he laughed for the first time, not because someone praised him, nor because he felt proud, but because he realized he had learned to stay with imperfection, to stay in moments he once would avoid. On the last morning before departure, he sat beside the elder on the mossed stone steps, voice trembling with emotion. "Master, I came here believing I needed to be taught something grand, yet all these days you taught nothing at all?" The elder closed his eyes a moment, then met the young man's gaze, not sharp, nor solemn, just like a wind-stilled lake, and said quietly, "Some steps you must take yourself. No one can teach you when to lift your foot." That answer, though simple, followed him endlessly, no matter where he later traveled or whom he met. He never forgot that the greatest lesson he received was unnamed, written in rain. Wet logs, smoky kitchens, unjudging gaze, a lesson that ended his running, ended his questions, ended his thirst for sudden awakening, allowing him instead to live in awareness without needing recognition. Years later, that young man became a respected teacher invited to share the Dharma in many places. Though never formally ordained, people came not for theory or meditation techniques, but simply to sit near him, to absorb something unspoken. In his talks, he often told small life stories, lighting a fire in the rain, stacking wood to dry, brewing tea on a cold morning, simple things seemingly unrelated to Zen, yet instantly silencing listeners by touching something deeply human, real, and quietly powerful. When asked about his first spiritual teacher, he would smile gently and recount the hermit on the mountain, one who never spoke a teaching, never called him disciple, but whose presence influenced him far more than any other teacher he ever met. One cold evening in the north, while preparing a humble meal with students in the monastery garden, a young woman asked, "Master, have you ever felt lost?" as if everything suddenly seems meaningless and you don't know how to live anymore. It wasn't a philosophical question but a true cry from a drifting soul. He didn't answer right away. Simply crushed old leaves by hand and moved them aside. After a pause, he smiled gently. There was a time when I woke every morning not knowing why I lived. I went to that mountain not to train in the Dharma, but because there was nowhere else to go. And then the wet logs, the smoky kitchen, and a bowl of hot tea showed me no great meaning is needed. Just learn to live kindly in every moment, not resisting, not demanding change. His answer did not resolve her doubt, but somehow made her cry, not from sadness, but because she felt relief for something that had weighed on her for so long. Shortly after, he returned to that mountain hermitage. The steep path remained, trees had grown denser, and the hermitage lay quiet among pines, unchanged. The elder, however, had no longer been there. Only his old tea set lay on the porch, sandals neatly at the door, and a yellowed piece of paper. The ink faded. He sat on the familiar mossy stone steps, where he once asked the naive question, "You never taught me anything?" and sat in silence as if holding a conversation with a presence deep yet invisible. No one welcomed him. No one bid farewell. No memorial bells. No eulogies. Only the forest breeze rustling the canopy, and the stream flowing as it always did. In that moment, he understood. A true teacher never truly leaves. That which is genuine doesn't need form to endure. The teacher now dwelled in every breath he bore, every gaze he offered to students, every silent meal he shared. On the narrow mountain path leading down from the hermitage, he paused at the slippery slope where he once fell. There, a small cluster of wild purple flowers grew between the rocks, unplanted, unpraised, yet quietly beautiful. He bowed deeply, not only to that small flower but to the nameless journey it symbolized. Every step that carried him forward or backward, every moment of despair or fiery anger, every flash of hopelessness, none of it was wasted. Every heartbreak, every challenge was a lesson, even when no one spoke it. Because life in its most raw form had always been the greatest teacher. If only we are still enough to listen. Within a moss-covered temple perched mid-hill, where ancient stone steps turned slippery year-round and bells echoed beneath dense canopy, lived a novice named Nien. At 13, he was thin, quiet, and often teased by older monks for his awkwardness and missteps in rituals. His teacher, a kindly abbot who rarely scolded, allowed Nien to find his way through small difficulties in temple life. Not out of indifference, but because he believed some lessons are grown through our own confusion, not taught by repeated lectures. Each morning, when the third bell tolled and the other monks sat in meditation, Nien would arrive late, breathing hard, his robe askew, sandals mismatched, eyes cast downward as if apologizing to the entire world. One afternoon, after being scolded for spilling porridge meant for offering, he fled to a quiet corner of the bamboo grove, seated himself on the ground, clutching his robe, eyes brimming with a silent sorrow. The rustling leaves did not comfort him. Distant chanting sounded far removed. In that moment, he felt he didn't belong. Not talented enough, agile enough, or smart like the others. Then he noticed a small injured sparrow beside him, wing twisted, struggling to breathe. Without thinking or hesitation, He scooped it into his sleeve, carried it back, splinted it with torn fabric, gently cleaned its wounds, and placed it in a wooden box cushioned with dry leaves. For a week, he secretly offered grains of rice and sips of tea to the bird. No one knew except him and the slowly recovering sparrow. In that time, he began to rise earlier, lay his robe neatly before sleep, polish his sandals before placing them by the doorway, practice walking meditation silently in the courtyard before dawn, quiet transformations unknown to others but unmistakably present. One morning, he opened the box, and the sparrow was gone. Only a few feathers lay on the dry leaves. The window stood ajar, curtain gently swaying in the breeze. He did not mourn or regret, only sat quietly for a while. Then smiled gently. For the first time, he realized he was not caring for the bird, but awakening tenderness and strength within himself. From that day on, Nian was no longer late for meditation, no longer stumbled during chanting, no longer feared the gaze of others. Though still quiet, whenever someone asked for help, he nodded gently and acted, stepping away afterward, content in the act alone rather than recognition. One day, the abbot paused by the courtyard while Nian was laying his robe to dry. He looked into his eyes and quietly said, "Some wounds do not need bandages, just someone quiet enough to sit beside them." No accusation, no explanation, but Nian understood. His master had known all along. What he sought was not perfection, but the moment a heart cares without expecting return. Years later, after becoming an elder monk in a small mountain hermitage, Nian would tell young seekers the story of the nameless sparrow. Not as a moral allegory but as a whisper. Even the smallest life, if truly listened to, can lead us home to ourselves. Nobody ever knew the sparrow's name or where it flew, but for Nian, it was his first Dharma sound, not spoken but silently present, a feeble heartbeat that persisted in fragile breath, reminding him all life is worthy of being held, even without promise. Each autumn, when fallen leaves carpeted the courtyard, he'd pause beneath the bamboo grove and listen to the whisper of falling leaves, remembering the boy who once sat here, feeling beaten, yet beginning to grow from one quiet act no one knew about. One autumn night, as temple bells chimed across the silent hillside, a new novice named Min was asked to sweep the rear courtyard, once the spot where Nian had sat with the sparrow. Clumsy and often distracted, Min would drop the broom or watch ants crawl. Forgetting his task, Nian never scolded. He simply walked by, paused for a moment, then continued. One windy day, leaves piled thick on the ground. Min, overwhelmed, stumbled, his broom flying from his hand in dust-laden air. Nian moved quietly to pick up a single leaf, placed it gently in Min's palm, and set it down again. No commands, no lecture, but in that moment, something shifted in Min's eyes, an understanding that his task was not to clear every leaf but to be present with each that fell. The next morning, as the sun rose behind the treetops, Nian saw Min seated on the stone step, broom in hand, eyes lifted towards slivers of sunlight through the treetops. No one coaxed him. He'd stayed outside since dawn. He swept in slow circles, not hurriedly gathering, but gently conversing with earth, tree, wind. The image made Nian recall his own childhood, hiding the sparrow in his sleeve, fearing even the sound of a passing adult's footsteps. Life had come full circle. Even the simplest gestures one day quietly grow roots in another heart, unspoken, unseen, yet deeply planted. Nian knew that whether Min remained a monk or eventually left the path, that moment he spent sweeping quietly, smiling at the breeze, gently gathering leaves, would remain in him as a core memory. Not because it was heroic, but because it was real. In each soft swipe of broom, Nian heard the ancient call of continuation, not by blood or words, but by fully present presence. There was no teaching, nor need for teaching, yet between them flowed silent transmission, so profound it needed no ceremony. Only the convergence of hearts fully awake in ordinary acts. That evening, as he folded his robe before the evening meditation, Nian glanced into the courtyard and noticed Min had silently hung the broom back in its wooden hook by the wall. Then Min bowed deeply toward the empty courtyard. No one there to receive that bow, yet it seemed he was expressing gratitude for something unseen. Nian gently closed the door, breathed slowly, then sat on his meditation cushion. He neither closed his eyes nor chanted sutras. He simply allowed each breath to pass lightly. Much like the sparrow once drifting into peaceful sleep in the arms of a child learning to care without needing acknowledgement. In that moment, the old story no longer lived as personal memory, but as a vital undercurrent flowing through generations, like wind passing through forest. Water flowing over stone, silent, yet softening everything around it. In a small riverside village, rustic tile-roofed houses stood scattered among uncultivated rice paddies. In one simple bamboo hut lived a middle-aged man who made his living weaving nets and paddling a boat each dawn to set his net midstream. He was known in the village as the Quiet Man, for though he had lived there over 10 years, he never spoke in gatherings, never complained, never laughed out loud. Villagers tolerated him. The children teased him, tossing stones at his hut or pretending to ask questions, then laughing when he only nodded. He never reacted, never scolded, never avoided. He simply continued weaving, mending nets, as though outside noise held no place in his world. One morning, after unusual heavy rains upriver, flooding the stream with mud, debris, and dangerous currents, villagers feared to venture out. Yet early that day, the Quiet Man quietly guided his boat into the churning water, set his well-mended net, and paddled away, without farewell. Whispers spread. He's lost his mind. He lived silent long enough to have forgotten fear. But by evening, when the sun had set and mist clouded the river, his boat reappeared, laden with fresh fish, the net intact and the boat steady. He pulled ashore, unloaded the fish into evenly divided bamboo baskets, and distributed them to those living near the bank. No thanks, no explanation, then silently retreated to his hut. That night, as the river rose further and storms battered the village, the Quiet Man flung open his hut door, braced the roof poles, hung every remaining fish out of reach of floodwaters, then moved from house to house, quietly helping to carry sacks of rice, secure doors, relocate flames, and gather wood as water flooded the courtyard. No one had asked. He simply did what needed doing and moved on. Anonymous. When the water lapped into the temple yard, he plunged into waist-deep currents to retrieve an elderly woman's forgotten pot. In the morning, Villagers found him still there, the only person who had remained through the darkness. Next day, some villagers brought him sticky rice, fresh vegetables, or left awkward thank you notes. He accepted nothing through force nor refusal. He simply placed all offerings on an old bamboo table outside, and left them there for days. When a child finally asked, "Why don't you speak? No one knows what you think." The man paused, gazed at the boy longingly, and silently pointed toward the river. The boy turned. Only water drifted on, carrying fallen leaves, nothing remarkable. But in that moment, he felt something deeply significant, not with ear or mind, but through quiet attentiveness. Maybe that had always been his presence, like the flowing stream. Not seeking credit, not declaring itself, simply present, doing what was needed when needed. From that day on, villagers no longer called him the man who speaks not, but rather the one who knows how to listen, because he seemed to know when to show up, when to be silent, and when a single nod was enough to reassure someone that they weren't abandoned. Children who once teased him now became the first to help carry his water, clear his yard, check in when the seasons turned. Though he never taught a single word of Dharma, never spoke of meditation or letting go, the way he lived became a resounding silent teaching in the hearts of villagers. No lecture was needed to teach kindness. No grand rituals to manifest compassion, just honest, quiet life. Like a boat across floodwater leaving no wake, yet changing the flow for anyone ever seen. In the quiet reinterpretation of these stories, perhaps you've already felt something deeper than words, a gentle touch on the softest part of the soul. Each story is a small door opening to a world in which we need not strive or chase, only sit sometime with ourselves and be present. We don't need to become somebody else, nor travel far to learn the way. Simply living fully in ordinary moments, like sweeping leaves, chopping wood, tending the flame, bowing before a wild flower, is itself a silent Dharma talk. If this moment brought you peace, please take a breath and hit the subscribe button for the Silent Soul Garden channel. It's our way of staying quietly connected, no noise, no rush, but with an unspoken promise. Next time you need a space to return to stillness, I will be here waiting. May you sleep in peace, awake with ease, and may your heart always know how to smile at life. Until next time.